Good morning and welcome. My name is Adrienne Davis, and I am Vice Provost and the William M. Van Cleve Professor of Law, and I am the founding director of the Center for the Study of Race, Ethnicity, and Equity at Washington University. It is always my pleasure to introduce our still new Chancellor, Andrew D. Martin, who was appointed as our 15th Chancellor on July 14th, 2018. Andrew is perhaps most distinguished by being a member of the hiring committee at the law school that hired me, but he has many other distinctions to his credit as well. From 2014 to 2018, he served as the Dean of the College of Literature, Science, and the Arts at the University of Michigan. And previously, he served in various positions at Washington University, including as the Charles Nagel Chair of Constitutional Law and Political Science at the School of Law, Vice Dean of the School of Law, founding director of the Center for Empirical Research in the Law, and chair of the Department of Political Science in Arts and Sciences. He is perhaps best known as both a scholar and a teacher for his work in judicial decision-making and political methodology. He has received the Outstanding Faculty Mentor Award and the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences at Washington University in 2011, and the Distinguished Faculty Award from our university's Alumni Board of Governors in 2013. Andrew has countless academic and administrative accolades to his credit, but what I want to focus on today is his stature as a leader with vision. He is a scholar's chancellor, he is intellectually curious, and he is intellectually ambitious for the university and for his faculty. When he was first appointed as chancellor, he asked for a meeting with me, and he sat me down and we chatted in the faculty club, and he said, what are the things that we need to be doing to put ourselves on the map in the study of race and ethnicity? And I referred him to a report that had been authored by many of my colleagues, students, faculty, administrators, students. I referred him to that report, and a few short months later, he said, we're going to do this. We're going to do this because global research universities, they tackle the great problems of our time, and I can't think of a greater problem of our time than the struggle over structural racism and ethnophobia. And with that, I will introduce you to our Chancellor, Andrew D. Martin.
Well, thank you, Adrienne, for that warm introduction. I must say that I'm not feeling like such a new chancellor anymore, given all that we've been through over these last 7 or 8 months. I'd also like to say good morning and thank you to everyone who's joining us today to celebrate this important milestone as we officially launch the Center for the Study of Race, Ethnicity, and Equity. I want to echo Adrienne's sentiments when I say how honored and grateful we are to have so many in attendance, including community leaders and distinguished guests. This is truly a testament to the significance of this center and the passion our community has for these disciplines and the important work that lies ahead. I also want to share how especially grateful I am for my friend and colleague, Vice Provost and William Van Cleve Professor of Law, Adrienne Davis, for leading this charge. As I said when we first announced this initiative, she is truly the ideal choice to serve in this role as a leading interdisciplinary scholar in the areas of law, gender, and race, and having led the university's Commission on Diversity and Inclusion. Vice Provost Davis has devoted her career and scholarship to creating paradigms for engaging race, gender, and sexuality. She has strengthened WashU's efforts to recruit and retain an outstanding and increasingly diverse faculty, staff, and student body, and has enhanced our community and region through sponsored lectures, programs, and courses that aim to uplift conversations around these issues. Once again, I'm grateful for her leadership, and I'm just as thrilled to know that she has hit the ground running with big plans and a bold vision for the center to bring together scholars across the university and across the disciplines into a bold research force. The center will be at the core of our mission for research and educational distinction, and will engage race and ethnicity through multiple disciplinary lenses. It will galvanize new scholarship, policy, and practice aimed at better understanding and tackling structural racism and its myriad consequences. At the same time, it will support our faculty as they explore the multiple meanings of race and ethnicity over time and across place. I first announced this initiative during the spring 2019 annual Day of Discovery, Dialogue, and Action. I thought it was appropriate to do so in conjunction with that day because of the reason and symbolism behind the genesis of that event. A day for members of our community to intentionally come together and engage in dialogue and discovery in the aftermath of the killing of Michael Brown Jr. Here we are, a little over 6 years since his death, and it feels as if we have not come much further on the path toward understanding, justice, and equity as it relates to race and ethnic origin. In fact, the ongoing killing of people of color, including George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and too many others, makes it seem as if we have stood still or even moved backwards. In addition, this pandemic continues to shine a light on other critical issues, such as xenophobia and tensions at our borders, along with racial, health, economic, and education disparities, among others. That's why the launch of this center is so timely and even more paramount than ever before. As an institution, we cannot sit idly by or simply pay lip service with words. We must also act and invest in what we believe in. A big part of that action starts today with this center, which will bring together so much of the work already being done across our disciplines and units, and which aims to further that work so we can strengthen our research mission, inform policy, and engage and partner with our communities. In fact, I am confident that the center will serve as one of the principal academic arms in our commitment to St. Louis and the world. As Adrian once said, as a research university, we should be investing in ending racism as we invest in ending cancer. This is why we support and amplify research excellence to that end. Once again, I'm grateful to Adrian, to the associate directors, and many of the colleagues who have worked alongside her to make this happen. This is yet another extension of our mission to improve lives in service of the greater good, and I look forward to seeing how this center will create synergies and build on momentum we already have in place. It is now my great pleasure to introduce one of the newest members of our Washington University community, Executive Vice Chancellor and Provost Beverly Wendland, who joined us this summer after a distinguished career at Johns Hopkins University. Beverly. You're muted.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Andrew, and to everyone else here who is participating in this auspicious day of this launch. The Center for the Study of Race, Ethnicity, and Equity marks an essential step forward for the teaching and research mission of WashU. WashU already boasts some of the top scholars on race and ethnicity, and the CRE2 provides these scholars with an opportunity to further distinguish themselves and their work. CRE2 is a fitting complement to another component of Chancellor Martin's plan for racial action, the Race and Ethnicity Cluster Hire Initiative, which aims to hire 12 outstanding scholars. With this set of hires, the university will increase its capacity to examine some of the most pressing questions of our time, complement and advance the expertise of outstanding researchers and departments, and embed a suite of varied methodological approaches to race in the intellectual life of the Danforth campus. The cluster hires will contribute to and draw from CRE2 to help WashU build a world-class research program on race and to make WashU a place of distinction in this area. So today is a day for celebration. Today is also a day to remember. It was not inevitable that WashU would have a Center for the Study of Race, Ethnicity, and Equity, or a Race and Ethnicity Cluster Hire Initiative, or even a Department of African and African American Studies. 50 years ago, WashU had nothing like this. But by the bold and brave efforts of the Association of Black Collegians, under the leadership of Black students like Robert Johnson, the faculty supported their plan to initiate a program of Black studies, and Chancellor Elliott agreed to implement such a program. The last 50 years have seen steady progress on this path of scholarly inquiry as part of a broader march toward greater inclusivity at the university, a journey, in the words of Gerald Early, with its bumps and hesitations, yet with thoughtfulness and a sense of caring. We should also hold in our hearts pioneers like Jim McLeod, who did so much to make WashU a place where people of color could thrive and scholarly inquiry on race could flourish. Now we may reflect on our own moment in WashU's history. I see WashU as a community ready to meet the challenges of the present. CRE2 is an essential part of our rising to the occasion. We are fortunate to have such outstanding faculty and students who are dedicated to expanding our research potential in the area of race, ethnicity, and equity. All of our schools have so much to contribute to this center, and the center in turn will strengthen each school's ability to carry out each of their missions. By bringing together accomplished faculty in the humanities, social sciences, arts, and the professional schools, our scholars have the opportunity to amplify their research and ensure maximum impact. The transdisciplinary focus of the center, together with its suite of tools, grants, faculty, fellowships, working groups, all equip our faculty to better examine race, ethnicity, and equity. The launch of CRE2 could not be more timely. Such outstanding research and teaching is exactly what we need at this time. The work undertaken at CRE2 is an integral part of our society, confronting and resolving some of the greatest challenges. CRE2 will be a place where our community will work to understand these complex problems and, if I may be so bold, will generate impactful solutions. So thank you, Adrian. Thank you to all of the associate directors. Thank you to everybody who's here today to help us launch this important, auspicious center for all of the work that they're going to be doing. So do I hand it back to Adrian now?
Yes. Thank you, Beverly. In Talbert versus Jenny, a Virginia case decided in 1828, Jenny's master, Mr. B. Talbert, promised her that after she gave birth to 5 children, so that each of his own children could enslave one of hers, he would free her. In 1792, Mr. Talbert gave the deed to Jenny and her son Moses to his own son, Charles Talbert, as collateral for a loan. Confirming the understanding that the deed was only collateral and not a transfer, Jenny and her family remained with Talbert Sr. Later, the Talbert family did indeed divide up Jenny's 5 children. With the understanding that Jenny had fulfilled her end of the bargain and she and her 6th child were now free. Shortly thereafter, the Talbert patriarch did in fact emancipate Jenny and her 6th son, Lorenzo. Jenny subsequently had 2 more children who, along with Lorenzo, lived with her as free. The situation continued after Talbert Sr.'s death, with Jenny's first 5 children divided amongst the adult Talbert children and her last 3 children living with her as free Blacks until 1813, when Talbert Sr.'s son, Charles, seized Jenny's 3 youngest children, claiming them as his property by virtue of the deed his father had given him in 1792. Jenny, he apparently had no interest in re-enslaving. While we cannot know for sure why, this would be consistent with slaveholders emancipating older slaves who were beyond profitable productive and, in the case of women, reproductive labor. Jenny sued to enforce Talbert Sr.'s promise, asking the courts to declare the freedom of her last 3 children. Perhaps stunningly, the Virginia Supreme Court, with Justice Wythe, an anti-slavery judge presiding, upheld Jenny's manumission petition. It declared her children free based on a series of technicalities regarding the deed, and also a determination about the equities of the Talbert children's inequitable behavior towards their father. It is heartening that Jenny and her younger children were set free. And yet it is hard not to understand this case as anything other than a sickening case study in what Ariela Gross and Alejandro de la Fuente call the ongoing national project of Black debasement. Disentangling the horrifying, mystifying dynamics in Talbert versus Jenny has been my life's work. The relentless commodification of every aspect of Black life, our joy, our intimacy, our children, the ongoing assault on the Black family, false promises of liberty grounded in contracts of corruption. Indeed, the Enlightenment's invention of contract as a tool of individual uplift here reduced to a Faustian bargain, coded in the nation's moral decay of slavery. The false promise of racial benevolence as a cure for structural racism. This is the work that I do at the intersection of slavery's racial and gender supremacy, the restless ancestors of today's misogynoir, the ongoing fight for racial reproductive justice, and yes, excavating the impossible possibilities of private law to wrench justice from a racial contract that was dead on arrival. These issues continue to plague us, and over time, other ones have taken root in our racial and ethnic landscape. And while structural racism and ethnophobia transmute across geography and place, in few places are they more acute than in St. Louis. 200 years after the Missouri Compromise, and more than a century and a half after the Supreme Court's Dred Scott decision, the St. Louis region continues to be at the fulcrum of the nation's debates over race and racial equality. Historian Walter Johnson, my friend, has called us the broken heart of America. As the chancellor said, we have asked, what would it mean to tackle racism as we tackle cancer? To bring the full research force of Washington University to bear in bringing racial supremacy to its knees. Our Chancellor, Andrew Martin, has taken up this question. He's asked us, how can we leverage our research and education mission to tackle systemic racism everywhere, and here, at home, turn St. Louis into the beating heart of America? How can we turn St. Louis into a model of an equitable urban future that overcomes not only structural racism, but also the ethnophobia that greets brown and yellow bodies at the border? And as my colleague Bob Chang says, the border and its carceral politics greet these Latinx and Asian bodies everywhere they go. At the same time, the equitable future we seek is not one purged of race. Race and ethnicity are more than structural deficits and disparities. They comprise cultures and populations and practices that have yielded some of the best in humanity. In February 2019, our then brand new chancellor, Andrew, announced as his first academic initiative a new university-wide center for research on race and ethnicity. Our university is distinguished by a formidable faculty, soon to be enhanced by 12 more, who work on this set of issues, including ever-shifting forms of discrimination, developing new tools to intervene in political exclusion, segregation in the built environment, how race is represented in popular culture and the media, global histories of migration and movement, research on disparities and inequities in health, education, economic opportunity, and policing, crafting new frameworks for how we understand colonialism and its aftermath, and carceral injustice against Black, brown, and yellow people everywhere. Our chancellor charged us with creating this university-wide center to harness the research force of the entire university to study how race and ethnicity are integral to the most complex and challenging issues of our time. It is important to excavate for just a moment the deep foundation on which CRE2 rests, my outstanding colleagues who are lions in their fields, and also the emerging forces that will define our research future, and the decades of leadership who hired our colleagues and gave them the support they needed and deserved, including Bill Danforth, Mark Wrighton, and their provosts, Ed Macias and Holden Thorpe. And now our new leadership, which is guiding us into the future, Andrew Martin and Beverly Winland. I also want to thank the Commission on Diversity and Inclusion Committee that were the architects of this report, students, faculty, and administrators. The Center for the Study of Race, Ethnicity, and Equity, or CRE2 as we call it, believes in field-defining research, innovative learning, and strategic engagement that will transform scholarship, policy, and clinical interventions where race and ethnicity are at the center. CRE2 has 3 pillars: research, learning, and community. Research. We galvanize and incubate new research architectures and vocabularies, insurgent methodologies and practices, and novel interventions. Our goal is to promote our colleagues' path-breaking research that shapes national scholarship and broader conversations on race, ethnicity, and provides an infrastructure for our faculty members to intervene in public policy, in public discourse and policy design, including addressing local and regional needs. Learning. We design next-generation learning opportunities and innovative environments that will bring our community members together. and community. We cultivate the cross-campus hub where local, national, and global citizens and leaders can connect, collaborate, and believe together. Our acronym, CRE2, was inspired by the imperative form of the verb creer in Spanish, cre, which means believe. We believe that knowledge production can yield the understanding crucial to transforming the trajectory of racial and ethnic justice in this country and the world. We believe that innovative policies and practices, clinical practices and artistic practices and design practices alike can, as Dr. Martin Luther King said, bend the arc of the universe towards justice. We believe that our mission of educating the next generation of global leaders includes, at a minimum, cultivating literacy in these issues, which, if not solved, will threaten the future of democracy and justice. And aspirationally, we believe that engaging our students in the study of race and ethnicity at this point in their lives will yield the next Nelson Mandelas and Toni Morrisons. We believe in the power of global research universities to solve the world's problems. We believe this is best done in partnership and collaboration with our communities, which themselves have knowledge, expertise, and vision. We believe in the power of our colleagues to do this work. We believe in the future through our students. We invite you to believe with us. And it is my pleasure to introduce the co-architects of CRE2, our center, our 5 assistant directors: William Akery, who's Associate Professor of Romance Languages and Literatures; Hedwig Lee, Professor of Sociology; Otis Johnson, Professor of Education and Sociology; Cynthia Rogers, Associate Professor of Psychiatry at our medical school; and our newest Associate Director, Jeff Ward, Professor of African and African American Studies.
Thank you for passing the baton, Adrian, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Otis Johnson, Jr., and I'm one of the Associate Directors of CRE2 with faculty appointments in the Departments of Sociology and Education. As one who served on the race task force that generated the report that has, in just a few years, kindled the launch of CRE2, I can attest to the tremendous amount of planning and information gathering that has supported this moment on Indigenous Peoples Day, I might add. The center's leadership, of course, wanted to continue bringing as much information to bear on the center's path forward as it had in its inception. And therefore, this past summer, we fielded a campus-wide faculty survey. Our survey reached 5,294 individuals that were either tenure track, lecturers, or adjunct professors, with the most of them being on the medical campus. We were excited to receive responses from 1,650 of them. We had 2 major goals with the survey in mind. First, to assess the needs, wishes, and possible research innovations among faculty that could catalyze the kind of excellence and social transformation that the center hopes to showcase. Second, we wish to take an inventory of research endeavors that advance knowledge about race, ethnicity, and how it relates to the important and yet unfinished pursuit of social equity. So in addition to the typical demographic information, we also ask questions like, in what ways does your scholarly work intersect with the study of race and/or ethnicity? And for them to briefly describe their current engagements on the topics of race and ethnicity. As you can see in the bar graph, the CRE2 survey received interest from all segments of the university community. The red bars indicate the percentage of respondents among all respondents to our survey, according to the college or school in which they are appointed. And for the sake of comparison, we included how faculty are distributed across schools and colleges with the purple bar. For example, faculty within the College of Arts and Sciences constituted approximately 38% of faculty who responded to our survey, while the purple bar shows that they are only 17.8% of faculty on campus. We are happy that the faculty of most of our academic units were represented among our respondents in rates that equal their representation among all faculty on campus. Our survey results also show that interest in the study of race, ethnicity, and equity among WashU faculty is widespread, mirroring in most ways the racial and ethnic breakdown of the university's faculty. But most encouraging were the responses to our request for information about our faculty's scholarly activities that they're undertaking on the topics of race, ethnicity, and equity. Over 450 of our faculty reported having projects that further our understanding of race and ethnicity, providing us with nearly 1,000 individual research initiatives that CRE2 can catalog and engage through our many programs. These project descriptions, including 42,000 words, were used to create the word cloud that you see, in which the larger words that were mentioned in the faculty responses with greater frequency are larger. And as you can see, and of course, race and research were among the most frequently mentioned words, but also the words St. Louis, community, health, funding, as in grant funding, and disparities, and others also figured prominently into the work that is being done on campus. These projects span campuses, disciplines, eclipse our borders by studying diasporas and immigration, and topics too numerous to name, which speaks to the tremendous range and reach of the work that is being done at WashU and its local and global relevance. So in conclusion, with the faculty survey overview, I'd like to thank all of you who have shared your thoughts about the study of race, ethnicity, equity, and with that, I'll turn it over to Billy.
So good morning, everyone. I'm Billy Acree, an associate director with the center, and I am thrilled to be able to introduce you briefly to the CRE2 innovation space. We designed the innovation space to support and promote experimental research and approaches to the study of race and ethnicity. It aims to help faculty turn research ideas into concrete possibilities and to foster connections and creative cross-disciplinary, cross-school projects. We drew on two main sources in our planning. On the one hand, some of the phenomenal components of the centers that our guest direct informed our thinking about what this space could be. And then on the other, we were inspired by innovation hubs and collaborative ventures across the country that help generate startups, capitalize on entrepreneurial energy, and that launch new ideas in the sciences and engineering. What the CRE2 innovation space sets out to do, in connection with the center pillars that Adrian presented, is envision the future architecture of opportunity for research and collaboration. So what does this look like on the ground? The innovation space supports 3 time-limited theme-based configurations: labs, startups, and ateliers, what we call LSAs. These encompass both solo and collaborative ventures, as well as experimental models for learning and training. So LSAs are highly flexible and they're affiliate-led. I'll give you a brief overview of these 3 configurations. Labs are typically oriented around scholarly inquiry and experimentation to assess or address specific problems. So for example, you'll see on our site that one of our postdoctoral affiliates, Kenley Brown, is developing one of our first labs focused on Black girlhood studies that connects scholarly activities on campus with community conversations. Similarly, the Arts and Culture Action Lab, which Adrian will be speaking more about in just a minute, bridges the innovation space with our community pillar. Startups are transitional entities that advance the design, development, and acceleration of ideas and deliverables for race, ethnicity, and equity work. We imagine that colleagues from the Olin Business School and the McKelvey School of Engineering, for instance, might find this model especially exciting, and we hope that others will too. Lastly, the atelier model, as the word suggests, is a workshop space where trans-school, trans-departmental conversations, informal seminars, and activities might take shape. So, for example, someone from the School of Arts and Sciences might partner with a colleague from the Sam Fox School of Design and Visual Arts to explore Latinx street art and representations of ethnicity in urban spaces across the United States, and spin that out into perhaps a series of talks, podcasts, performances, and documentary videos. In short, we invite affiliates to design and build their creative home in our innovation space. And for those of you on campus, faculty, staff, postdoctoral fellows, residents, and trainees at our medical school can all become affiliates of the center. And with that, I will turn things over to Adrian to talk more about the Arts and Culture Action Lab.
Thank you, Billy. St. Louis is indelibly associated with racial tension and inequity. St. Louis is indelibly associated with racial tension and inequity. In the minds of outsiders and St. Louisans alike, the city is defined by the divide. Disparities, deficits, discrimination. This image was reinforced nationally by the 2014 uprisings in Ferguson and the Department of Justice report that followed, as well as ongoing protests, boycotts, and seemingly never-ending carceral and violent acts related to policing and other dimensions of racial inequality. Most recently, we witnessed my neighbors, the McCluskeys, wielding guns at peaceful protesters in an absurd performance of what I called St. Louis Gothic. These divides and disparities are deep and long-standing, and CRE2, our center, shares an ambition with the region's stakeholders and Washington University to disrupt and ameliorate them. However, we often miss the ways that race and ethnicity are also deep and significant assets for St. Louis, seen perhaps most clearly and richly in the arts and St. Louis's cultural institutions and creative landscape. This is true equally of what we call the creative class that has made a home in St. Louis as visual artists, writers, musicians, designers, and dancers, journalists. It's also true of the minority serving and micro institutions that serve many cultures and ethnicities. It's true of the region's legacy cultural institutions and the legions of arts professionals who have made a home here and dedicated their life's work to making the arts accessible and empowering. Indeed, an entire generation of St. Louis artists was inspired by Ferguson and its aftermath to create art that is having a national impact. Finally, the university's own MFA programs in arts and sciences and in the Sam Fox School of Design and Visual Arts are consistently producing extraordinary graduates, alumni who now work on race, representation, and design at the highest levels. And our Kemper Museum also is at the forefront in engaging these crucial issues. In 1 year alone, St. Louis hosted both Michelle and Barack Obama's portrait artists, Amy Sherrod and Kehinde Wiley. And I believe we were the only city in the world to do so. And next year, the Metropolitan Opera in New York City will feature its first Black composer in its history. Terence Blanchard's opera, Fire Shut Up in My Bones, will open there. I'm astounded and proud that this opera was commissioned by our Opera Theater St. Louis and premiered here in 2019, featuring not only Blanchard as composer, but Yves Bayou writer-director Casey Lemons as librettist, and based on a story, the memoir, penned by journalist Charles Blow. A trifecta of contemporary Black genius brought together in our town. As people of color know, race is more than the divide. It's more than disparities. It is also about the richest aspects of American culture and some of our most salutary successes in celebrating indomitability. Of course, these contrasting stories of racial conflict and cultural vibrancy also collide in St. Louis and our region and are reflected in enduring challenges like the perpetual neglect of minority-serving arts and cultural institutions, selective cultural heritage preservation, representations of race and ethnicity, including erasure on the memorial landscape, and extreme underrepresentation among staff and leadership in many of these cultural institutions, including museums, libraries, and archives. The CRE2 Arts and Culture Lab has as our goal to help address these issues and others by serving as a key partner, hub, and incubator for race and ethnicity and the arts and culture in St. Louis. Through residencies, commissions, workshops, curated spaces, and local partnerships, the goals of our Arts and Culture Action Lab are to support and amplify arts and culture work that already is happening, to incubate new creative work and related research, curricular, and community initiatives at the intersection of race, ethnicity, arts, and culture, to help enhance the pipeline for arts and culture professionals of color trained in these issues, to galvanize efforts to use arts and culture initiatives as a driver for racial and ethnic equity, including heritage preservation and reparative commemorative projects, to serve as a national global hub that draws artists and arts professionals to the region and promotes the richness of St. Louis's arts and culture scene regarding race and ethnicity. That is our Arts and Culture Action Lab.
Good afternoon, everyone. Make sure I'm unmuted. Okay, great. My name's Hattie Lee, and I'm one of the associate directors of CRE2. And I'm excited to talk to you about some of the many resources that we have available to our affiliates that address pressing issues of our time. CRE2 has designed one of its core areas of inquiry around the intersections of race, ethnicity, public health, and medicine. We are launching a deeper focus into the set of issues raised by COVID-19. The COVID-19 pandemic has made more urgent the need for robust, cross-disciplinary, and collaborative research. CRE2 invites proposals for transdisciplinary projects that will generate new research frameworks and methodologies that capture the challenges and insights revealed by the racially and ethnically disparate impacts of COVID-19. These special focus grants will accompany our regular grants program launching this spring, focused on transdisciplinary projects that enrich scholarly engagement related to the center's mission. We anticipate these will span the medical and public health fields, as well as the social sciences, humanistic social sciences, humanities, engineering sciences, and arts, architecture, and design. The principal aim of this program is to assist in the generation of both new scholarly frameworks and on-the-ground policies and practices related to the broad set of issues connected to race, ethnicity, and equity that have been raised by COVID-19. Awards will be made up to $30,000. Proposals are due Monday, November 2nd, 2020, and more information can be found on our website. You can also reach out to any of the associate directors and our founding director, Adrienne Davis. This opportunity is open to all CRE2 faculty affiliates, and we look forward to supporting affiliates as they engage in cutting-edge research on race and ethnicity now and in the future. Thank you, and I think Jeff Ward is next.
Thank you, Hetty, and thank you to our Chancellor and Provost, to our directors, the Center, and to everyone who's with us today. Really want to express my gratitude for the support of this important initiative and my enthusiasm about the various projects we have underway. Globally and locally, we see a growing commitment to confronting historical trauma and question of redress. And Washington University in St. Louis is playing an important role here. I'd like to quickly highlight this contribution in one key initiative. Alongside the launch of CRE2 and several other efforts, Washington University is becoming active in the global consortium of universities studying slavery. We're joining the more than 70 universities across numerous countries in grappling with the historical relationship between slavery and our institution and considering their enduring significance. CRE2 is leading a planning group that will develop a deeply interdisciplinary approach to understanding Woolstool and slavery with extensive campus and community engagement. This campus effort is developing in active partnership with related efforts by local government entities, museums, and other cultural institutions, and community-based organizations to better understand and address the ways that histories of empire, enslavement, and their legacies shape our landscape, our culture, and our institutions. Missouri can fairly be characterized as freedom's compromise state, historically and in some ways still today. Our distinguished university emerged in 1853 from within a city, state, and region that was simultaneously playing outsized roles in atrocities against Native Americans and the expansion of a global economy built upon the enslavement, economic exploitation, and political exclusion of African people. There's tremendous research evidence of the enduring impact of histories of empire, enslavement, and their afterlives, specifically in shaping the structures of inequality that endure still today. Washington University faculty across numerous fields are leading advancements in this research, as well as efforts towards translation in policy and creative practice and in many other ways. Ultimately, through this important initiative and many others, we expect Washington University and the St. Louis metropolitan area will grow distinguished by our collaborative efforts to not only understand and acknowledge historical trauma, but our work to creatively and effectively counter specific ways we socially embody and reproduce them. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Cynthia Rogers, and I'm one of the Associate Directors of CRE2. My role as an Associate Director representing the medical school is to bring the CRE2 initiatives around race, ethnicity, and racial equity to our very vibrant research efforts at the medical school. One of our first initiatives was creation of the School of Medicine CRE2 Grand Rounds Partnership. Grand Rounds is a long-standing tradition within clinical departments at medical schools that brings speakers to discuss clinically and research-relevant topics. The School of Medicine CRE2 Grand Rounds Partnership aims to increase the representation of Grand Rounds speakers whose work is centered on health, race, and/or ethnicity across specialties, disciplines, and schools. With the assistance of several colleagues from the medical school and the Brown School of Social Work, we are providing consultation to the clinical departments to identify these speakers with CRE2, co-sponsoring the speakers alongside the clinical departments. CRE2 is co-hosting speakers with at least 3 departments annually. We currently have speakers scheduled with the Departments of Internal Medicine, Obstetrics and Gynecology, and Psychiatry for this academic year. Additionally, we have created the School of Medicine Advisory Group, where I will be working with colleagues from the medical school to make recommendations to the CRE2 leadership team on how to continue to promote and integrate CRE2 initiatives on the School of Medicine campus, as well as engaging both campuses in mutual initiatives. This advisory group will provide recommendations on how we can best support activities across all 3 CRE2 pillars, including increasing visibility of research on racial disparities in health at the medical school, strengthening partnerships with community agencies that are focused on reducing racial and ethnic health disparities, and providing students, residents, and trainees increased awareness of the role race and ethnicity play in determining health outcomes through curriculum, training, and research opportunities. We are very excited about these School of Medicine CRE2 initiatives. Thank you. I'll hand it back to Adrian.
Thank you. And someone's ringing my doorbell and I can't do anything about that. So I apologize. I want to talk about our learning pillar, Believe in Learning. CRE2 designs next generation learning opportunities and innovative environments to bring our community members together. I was moved and inspired by the students who served on the committee that helped design this center. There were students minoring in Asian American Studies who explained that they cannot disaggregate their academic and their co-curricular lives, that they brought their newfound understanding of race and ethnicity into their lives outside of the classroom, while their advocacy and cultural work outside the classroom informed and enriched their formal learning spaces. There were students majoring in African and African American Studies who said that the outstanding curriculum my colleagues have developed around the Black experience made them now hungry for frameworks for understanding race comparatively. And there were students who explained they arrived at the university planning to major in non-race related fields, and by the time they realized they wanted to pursue graduate work in race and ethnicity, found it was too late. And I found the latter especially heartbreaking. The sine qua non of a liberal arts education is to inspire students to find, study, and embrace their passion, to open up new dimensions of knowledge, meaning, and understanding of the human condition. Hence, CRE2 has designed a very focused, carefully calibrated set of learning opportunities. These include a sequence of methods courses designed to introduce freshmen, sophomores, and juniors to the set of methods with which researchers will tackle the study of race and ethnicity. The first course surveys the suite of methods researchers use, and following this introductory course, students can elect between two courses. One offers them an opportunity to deepen their engagement with team-based approaches, while the other focuses on more solo methods. Our hope with these courses is to empower students early in their academic careers to discern whether they want to pursue the study of race, and if so, whether they are more interested in artistic, humanistic, social scientific, or mixed methods, so they can approach courses in anthropology, English, design, history, sociology. For graduate education, we offer a graduate rotating studio, which funds graduate and professional courses that are open to students across schools. The goal of the rotating studios is to create a dynamic, innovative, and collaborative graduate experience that, following CRE2's mission, will develop insurgent methodologies, new vocabularies and grammars, and expand the conversations about the study we do. This spring, following the model developed at Yale Center, we also will be inviting a cohort of graduate students to join the CRE2 as fellows every fall. And as my colleague Billy Acree noted, we also offer ateliers, which following the workshop or training model, are flexible workshops in which faculty can experiment with offering non-credit learning opportunities and engage with students across the schools for flexible amounts of time. For instance, this fall, I might have offered a 3-week atelier on misogynoir, or my colleague Ignacio Sanchez Prado might have offered a 2-week atelier on his critique, picked up nationally, of the novel Mexican Dirt. Finally, we offer a set of graduate, undergraduate, and high school research prizes in 3 areas: outstanding research papers on race and ethnicity, outstanding papers using Washington University Library's vast special collections on race and ethnicity, and outstanding papers on our community, St. Louis. This is only the beginning of our learning pillar, and we hope to partner with not only our colleagues, but also our students as we begin to deepen this foundational pillar. We also are offering Black papers. I think you all have heard of white papers. These are policy papers, brief policy papers written by academics and researchers to offer best practices, analysis, diagnosis, and best practices and ways to tackle, intervene, produce solutions to difficult challenges. We are offering local organizations to partner with us to craft what we're calling Black papers, and we hope to do 2 each year. I think we have time for a few questions. Hetty, do you think we have time for a few questions before we turn to our roundtable panel?
I think so, yes.
Great. Okay, I saw a question from Ingrid Anderson. Okay. Ingrid, are you unmuted now?
Adrian, I think that I'm not sure if individuals can ask questions given this format.
Okay,
but if people
that I can mute her, but
no, I'm sorry that I didn't intentionally push the button to ask the question. Everything's wonderful. I don't have any questions. Sorry about that.
Okay, no problem. No problem. I did see another one though. Let's see. I thought I saw another hand. No, it's gone down.
There's some questions showing up in the chat now, Adrian.
Okay. Thank you, Beverly. Try to get to the top of those.
Here, I can just to facilitate this since I'm in here. So Brian Harding is asking, do you feel a sense of closure has been accomplished when Kamala Harris made her statement about Breonna Taylor at the vice presidential debate last week?
I invite all of us to weigh in on that one. For me, I think the answer is no. I wouldn't call it closure. I would say that I feel some sense of relief to have people committed to racial justice moving into positions of meaningful power. But I wouldn't say that I feel closure. What about other colleagues? I see Otis, you're nodding your head. I can't see all of you, but you can just unmute yourselves.
Well, I would add, just like you, Adrian, I don't think closure is the word I'd use. I was encouraged by the specific policy proposals that Kamala Harris was mentioning. But sadly, the question should be, the true litmus here is, to what extent will the policy proposals actually prevent another Breonna Taylor from happening? And I don't think we're there yet. So we have much more work to do in terms of coming up with the type of innovations, especially around police training, and also the type of search warrants that they execute. Will take yet another level of training or reform within what we call the continuum of procedural justice.
Adrian, can I add another question into the mix? This one comes from Will Ross and Teresa Wilkie. And I'm sorry, Teresa, if I'm not pronouncing your last name correctly. Can you explain how community voices will be incorporated into the center? How do community organizations with insight into local solutions connect with appropriate staff, faculty at WashU to engage in Black paper development or pursuit of special focus grant funding?
Ms. Wilkie, thank you very much for both of those questions. And Hetty Lee put into the chat a link to our Black paper link so that you can find that. And what we're inviting community organizations to do is to connect up with us to propose different kinds of problems and things that we might be able to co-create solutions to. So please just copy that link out of the chat. And in terms of applying for grants, for most of our grants, you need to have a faculty member who's going to be a lead on it. But if you can go to our affiliates page. Hetty, can you also put the affiliates page in there? If you go to our affiliates page, you'll see that we have a fairly long and growing list. I think now we have maybe 50 folks up, any one of whom can serve as a faculty lead on a grant. And for many of the grants, like the Colors of COVID, we envision them as being broad-ranging and deeply collaborative. And to my friend, Dr. Ross, thank you. Dr. Ross was actually was one of the vice chairs of the commission that recommended the center, and it wouldn't be here today without his longstanding devotion to the university and specifically his work in on that commission report. So we'll, trying to incorporate and engage with our community really as you and I talk about a lot, as partners, as collaborators, right? Not as people to whom we're going and doing things, but people who are really trying to work in collaboration and thought partnership with. So one of the opportunities is the Black papers. We're inviting people to help us identify some of the local problems in the region. And already we've had some corporations reach out to us. We've had some cultural institutions reach out to us and say, hey, we're trying to figure out how do we tackle racism within our domains, and also how do we tackle structural racism and ethnophobia that are right now defining the region and are holding us back. Right. So that is, I think, one powerful way. And we're hoping that the Black papers will sort of serve as the initial entry point, and then we may be able to broaden it beyond the Black papers, which we envision only doing a couple a year, into sort of a broader, deeper set of community engagements around this deep questions that's at the heart of our chancellorship, right? Which is, how can we, as an anchor institution, become Washington University for St. Louis and help us become, as I say, a model for not the broken heart, but the beating heart, and for being a model of an urban equitable future. Will we also envision the Arts and Culture Action Lab? as being very, very community facing, not only again with the legacy cultural institutions, which are so wonderful, but also with a lot of the micro and minority serving cultural institutions that have been vastly under-resourced. And we want to find ways to amplify their work, to partner with them, to hopefully apply for national grants that are out there. So we're looking forward to all of that. So thank you, my friend Will, for being here.
Adrian, one more question before we transition. And this is from Diana Montano. She congratulates everyone and asks, has a question for those working outside of the United States, how the center envisions bringing in our contributions. And I was thinking maybe we could have Billy Akery talk a little bit about that, and then you could wrap it up and we'll move to the next.
Sure. Thank you very much, Deanna, for the question. I think there are many ways, right, that we envision bringing in contributions of colleagues who work on areas outside the United States. We invite everyone to explore our website to look at the funding opportunities, all of which are available for colleagues who are working around the world, right, in questions of race and ethnicity, equity around the world, specifically for people who are working on Latin America or in the Latinx diaspora. We have right now a Latinx, Latin American Race and Ethnicity Research Advisory Group that is putting together a series of recommendations for how the center might begin to flesh out this specific area, right, to incorporate and bring in more colleagues who are working on those areas in particular. But again, I would invite everyone to explore the website and to think through how their work might fit into one of our opportunities, whether that's in the research pillar, in the learning pillar, or in the community pillar.
And I'll sort of reinforce and amplify what Billy is saying. You know, we know that race is not limited to the United States, right? Of course. And we have colleagues doing amazing work on race and ethnicity globally. And it's very much our ambition and our hope that they will engage with us. One small step that we've taken is we have just partnered with the university's Africa Initiative. So we will be hosting a series of visitors probably every year who work across the whole range of issues that we care about, you know, knowledge production, policy design, and I believe we're going to start this spring in conjunction with African and African American Studies with a series that looks at how people on the African, how experts on the African continent have been grappling with COVID. But Diana, also, I really, really hope that you and your colleagues who do the kind of path-breaking work that you're doing will also see yourselves in the funding opportunities that we offer. So right now we have the call out. It's open until the end of October for the Colors of COVID-19 Special Focus Grants. They're up to $30,000 to study the set of issues that underline racial and ethnic disparities and geographic risk around COVID-19. And we know that these are not limited to the United States. So I was actually talking with a colleague who does work on pandemics and post-colonial societies, and I was encouraging her to apply for a grant. And maybe I could put the two of you together because I could see how your work might overlap really well with your work in Mexico and her work in Africa. So it's something we very much want to invite people to do because we have people doing amazing work in the Caribbean and Latin America and Central America and border studies. So we want to do that. And if you see opportunities that you think we're missing, please let us know. I saw a question that was posed. I think I've lost it. It was in the participants. I think it came in as an anonymous question, which said, will the CRE2 have physical space and will students be invited into the space? The answer to both of those is yes. Right now, space at the university, because of COVID, space everywhere is it is in transition. It is very much a moving landscape. So we're working closely with our provost, Beverly Winland, sort of in this shifting landscape to figure out what the right space is for us. And yes, students will be not only welcome but expected in our space. As I said, students were some of the most inspiring architects of all of this. And, our research mission, if we didn't have students, we would basically be a giant think tank, right? So you are what makes us a university. So in addition to our learning mission, we also have ways of inviting students in as junior researchers as well. So thank you for that question. And now I think it is time for us to turn to the directors roundtable, which I'm very excited about. I'm going to invite my colleague, Billy Acree, to introduce our esteemed directors.
So thank you again, Adrienne. We're going to move into the second half of our launch program, the Directors Roundtable. And we're incredibly fortunate to be joined today by 5 of the world's premier scholars of race, ethnicity, and equity research broadly defined, who are also leaders of 5 of the nation's most dynamic and cutting-edge centers where questions of race, ethnicity, equity, public health, community engagement, policy, and the intersections between them all are at the heart of their center's mission. And I have the great honor to introduce them to you. And if you just bear with me for 1 second, I want to get up the web pages of their centers for you all to see as I move through their introductions, albeit abbreviated introductions. Laurent Dubois is professor of Romance Studies and History at Duke University and is the founder and faculty director of the Forum for Scholars and Publics. Professor Dubois is an award-winning author whose scholarship has an incredible range and reach, from the Haitian Revolution to the history of the banjo to the politics of soccer, most recently with the best-selling book, The Language of the Game. Among his several books on the age of revolution in the Caribbean is A Colony of Citizens, Revolution and Slave Emancipation in the French Caribbean, 1787 to 1804, which won 4 prizes, including the Frederick Douglass Prize. His 2012 book, Haiti, The Aftershocks of History, was a New York Times Notable Book of the Year. His work on the cultural history of music, the banjo, America's African instrument, was supported by a Guggenheim Fellowship, a National Humanities Fellowship, and a Mellon New Directions Fellowship. And you can find his writings on music, history, and sport in The Atlantic, The Nation, The New Republic, The New Yorker, The New York Times, Slate, and Sports Illustrated. Chandra Ford is professor of community health sciences at UCLA, where she's also the founding director of the Center for the Study of Racism, Social Justice, and Health. Her field-defining research has focused on the relationship between forms of racism and disparities in HIV testing, care, and prognoses, as well as conceptual and methodological work to improve the tools used to study racism as a public health issue. She's also done extensive practice-oriented research targeting intimate partner violence among LGBT populations. Dr. Ford has published widely in journals ranging from the American Journal of Public Health and the Annals of Epidemiology to the Boston University Law Review. Among the extensive list of recognitions for her work, here are just a few. Dr. Ford is the recipient of the 2019 Paul Cornley Award from the Health Activist Dinner. She was a member of the National Academy of Medicine Committee on Community-Based Solutions to Promote Health Equity in the United States, and she has served as president of the Society for the Analysis of African American Health Issues, Public Health Issues. Derek Hamilton, who's coming to us via the New School from the Ohio State University, where he was the former director of the Kirwan Institute, is the Henry Cohen University Professor of Economics and Urban Policy and the founding director of the Institute for the Study of Race, Stratification, and Political Economy at the New School. Considered one of the nation's foremost scholars, economists, and public intellectuals, Hamilton's accomplishments include recently being profiled in the New York Times, Mother Jones Magazine, and the Wall Street Journal, and being featured in Politico Magazine's 2017 50 Ideas Shaping American Politics and the People Behind Them issue. He's also a member of the Margaret Casey Foundation in partnership with the Group Health Foundation's inaugural class of Freedom Scholars. His writings have appeared in the New York Times, The Atlantic, and Market Watch, among others, and you can find him on media outlets including the TED Talk series, MSNBC, and NPR. He has also advised numerous members of Congress, as well as various 2020 presidential candidates. Stephen Pitti is professor of history and American studies at Yale University, one of the nation's foremost scholars of Latino history, and the founding director of the university-wide Center for the Study of Race, Indigeneity, and Transnational Migration. He directs the Latino History Project, which explores ethnic Mexican, Puerto Rican, Dominican, Cuban, and other Latino histories in the United States, their links and divisions, their diversity, and their cultures and politics. Professor Pitti is the author of The Devil in Silicon Valley, Race, Mexican Americans in Northern California, and articles on Chicano history and historiography. He's also currently working on 2 book projects, The World of Cesar Chavez and Leaving California, Race from the Golden State. He was recently a fellow in residence with the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. Jennifer DeVere Brody is the director of the Center for Comparative Studies in Race and Ethnicity at Stanford University and professor of theater and performance studies. Her books, Impossible Purities, Blackness, Femininity, and Victorian Culture, and Punctuation, Art, Politics, and Play, both discuss relations among and between sexuality, gender, racialization, visual studies, and performance. She has served as the president of the Women in Theater program, on the board of Women and Performance, and she has worked with the Ford and Mellon Foundations. She received the Monette Horwitz Prize for Independent Research Against Homophobia, and she co-produced the Theme is Blackness Festival of Black Plays in Durham when she taught at Duke. Currently, Professor DeVere Brody is working on the republication of James Baldwin's illustrated book, Little Man, Little Man, and is writing a new book about the intersections of sculpture and performance. So our deepest thanks to you all for joining us this afternoon. Such an honor to be able to speak very briefly about your bios, and I will turn things over to Adrian for what is sure to be an incredibly rich conversation.
Thank you, Billy. So I am going to actually start with a rogue question. Our Dean of the McKelvey School of Engineering, Aaron Bobick, is here today. And so he put into the chat a question that I'm going to actually start us off with, because I thought I could try to answer it, but we've got the world's experts here, so we should do that. And also I want to congratulate Dean Bobick, whose school, along with our Brown School, has been approved for one of our cluster hires in data science and algorithmic bias. So congratulations, Dean Bobick, and if Dean McKay is on here, congratulations to her as well. So he asks, what is the difference? Clearly there is a difference. What is the difference between studying race and studying racism? So I'll open it up to my esteemed colleagues. You can just unmute yourselves if you want.
I guess I'll jump in. I think they are obvious. In my view, they seem to be obviously linked, but there are some distinctions. To me, when I hear racism, I hear more active, more action-oriented, something that is happening, being done on to some individual or group of individuals, where race is more descriptive. But I think a key point is to understand the action. We also need to understand the descriptive. So I might make the analogy of, if we're looking at contemporary phenomena, we often look at it from a standpoint of an analytical lens. So we might look at inequality and health outcomes between blacks and whites and come to a conclusion, well, black people are overweight. Black people choose to smoke, which we know they don't necessarily choose to smoke. But trying to look at race in a contemporary phenomena, health inequalities, for example, without a historical lens or some humanistic or descriptive understanding of how we got here would be incomplete. So I see them as distinct, but also intricately related and inseparable.
Thank you. Laurent, Chandra, Steve, Jennifer, anyone else want to weigh in?
Sure, I'll say something. Good morning, or everyone. It's morning where I am, but I want to first just say how impressed I am and what a wonderful, wonderful work you are doing here. So hats off to everyone at WashU. And about this question, I think that you'll see probably each of us might answer it a little bit differently, which is why we need 1,000 people in projects studying race, even at one university. So for me, I would say that racism is the driver that creates race in the first place. So historically, it was the desire for inequity to label people differently in different discourses, whether that was legal, religious, across many different disciplines. And I think even in terms of medicine, genomics, that there's not one simple answer to this. But I think, as Derek was saying, exactly, racism is that active, creative force which gives us race. In my assessment, I mean, it's a lot longer than that, but I think we wouldn't have race were it not for racism.
I would just jump in, first of all, also to say congratulations and thank you for having me today. As I think we're all very deeply impressed with what you're doing. For me, it's an interesting point that also just raises the fact that, of course, the definition of race itself, and once we move into kind of global conversations, there are very different debates or ideas about race. I know, for instance, working in France, the kind of question of the kind of the status of race in the French context is very different from the United States. One area that actually unifies people is that there's a kind of common sense of the way racial bias works or anti-Black racism works in these different societies, even if there are sometimes very different notions of what race really means as a category. But so I think they're intertwined, but I also think asking that question is a useful way of also bringing into kind of larger global conversations and thinking about those. So.
I want to thank you for this opportunity. I mean, it's just amazing to be here with this panel. Thank you, Vice Provost Davis. In public health, just naming racism is an amazing achievement. It's an important step forward because there is such an anchoring of race to the body, of categories to the body. And so explicitly naming racism is a big part of what is essential, in addition to focusing on not what it is about essential bodies or groups of bodies that drives disease, but what it is about the context in which human beings exist that leads to their racialization. So I think that's why it's important to study it in public health.
Great. Steve?
Yeah, I'll go last. And of course, the problem with going last is everybody's already said all the things that I might have wanted to say. I do want to reiterate my deep congratulations to all of those of you who've been involved in this really impressive project, and my thanks for the invitation today. And also, since it's Indigenous Peoples Day, to bring you greetings from Connecticut, the historic lands of the Quinnipiac and Algonquin-speaking peoples. The only thing I can think to say that hasn't maybe been said or articulated directly or forcefully on this question is that I think race and using that word also reminds us of different kinds of cultural and political projects that one hopes are and expects are usually launched and conceived and continued in the interests of dismantling racism. But the race itself can also be constructed in the interests of anti-hegemonic movements, anti-hegemonic projects. It can be defined in ways that bring people together in creative and new ways, again, with the hope of creating better societies. And it can also intersect, as we know, with projects that attempt to address other axes of power in the United States and around the world. And so I think racism, as Jennifer said, certainly creates race, but I think race also creates politics. And if we're interested in politics and culture in the contemporary moment, we do, I think, need to think about both of these terms in the ways that they work together in the political moment we're living in.
Thank you all, and thank you, Steve, for what you said. I was going to say myself that I also believe that race is also culture and race is sociality, right? It is absolutely sociality, and it's beautiful practices that comprise some of the best of humanity, even if many of them were launched in resistance to racism. So let's talk about our questions. We are collectively in the middle of multiple racial crises, in which critical understandings of race are needed more than ever. And yet the scholarly research lenses that many of us use are under concerted political attack, explicit concerted political attack. What is the importance of race centers right now, of academic race centers right now? Maybe I'll start with you, Chandra.
I think there is both promise and peril in the wings. A few Fridays ago, I was speaking on critical race theory at the CDC. It was the largest number of people they had attend this particular seminar series. A week later was the announcement that the Trump administration made about directly talking about targeting critical race theory. And a week after that, my collaborator, Colin Tyree-Mbu, and I, who had a contract with the CDC we were planning to do a training on critical race theory more broadly, was canceled. And so it felt like it was a very apparent way personally to see ways in which our broader societies are already under attack. And often in academia, we feel a little buffer from that. I think that the work of my center, which was actually established exactly 3 years ago today, very intentionally on Indigenous Peoples Day, has been to try to bring a public health orientation that is informed by critical race theory to this work, in part because there is a silencing that's happening by the distraction of the overt forms of racism. So how can, I think, a critical piece that these centers must do is address the ways in which I'll call liberal forms of racism might serve as bridges to some future racism, while we're all distracted by the very serious and very overt forms of racism that are happening in this moment.
Chandra, can you tell us what you mean by liberal forms of racism? Because that might be counterintuitive to some of our students or colleagues.
Sure. So while we are focused on, for instance, white supremacy in the forms that it takes in terms of self-identified Nazis marching in the streets, or neo-Nazis marching in the streets, liberal forms of racism, for instance, aversive forms of racism, are ways in which failure to recognize power differentials, racialized power differentials between individuals, institutions, and so on, blinds those in power from the ways in which they, despite their good intentions, nevertheless can and do enact various forms of racism, and I would say predictably enact them. So it works to retain the same racial structures, but in ways that are not recognized as racist quite as easily.
Thank you. Laurent.
Yes, thank you for that great question. As a scholar of Haiti, which is a place that has been attacked for 200 years precisely because of its radical revolution, right? I always sort of see, to some extent, I think these attacks are a measure of impact, right, and strength. I mean, they're not to say that they're not a huge problem, but it is striking in a sense the point at which those in power see that these are kind of a danger, right? Is I think interesting. I think it's important to take sort of stock of that and why that might be. These centers, of course, these kinds of projects do challenge the way universities have been structured, the way disciplines have been structured, the way knowledge forms have been structured for a very long time. They challenge colonial systems of knowledge that we've inherited and so forth. So they are challenging, I think, a lot. And in that sense, the fact that at the same time in their public impact, I think is part of what's happening, right? So whether it's the 1619 project, or I've been struck a lot, for instance, at just the activism of student athletes and the very kind of engagement with these very categories that you see with athletes on campus, which is something 10 years ago, for instance, I would have not expected, and it's happening. So you do sort of see these effects, and I think there are those who see these effects and are quite nervous about it. And I think obviously our work will be to sort of articulate clearly how vital this is, for the future of our country or other countries to really think thoroughly about this. But that's how I sort of see it. I think in some ways the advances and the attack are kind of should be seen together as part of what's happening more broadly, and a reminder of exactly why this is so important.
Thank you, Professor Hamilton. Derek.
So I apologize. I missed the question, and my internet went out. So I can say that I hate my internet company with a passion, and we need universal broadband access.
Yeah, we definitely need universal, and that is the digital divide is definitely part of all of this as well. So I had started with with the first question that we talked about, which is that we're in the middle of multiple racial crises in which critical understandings are needed now more than ever. And yet the scholarly and research lenses that many of us use are under concerted and explicit political attack. What is the importance of an academic race center right now?
Yeah. And, I did not lead with gratitude to be included in this panel in my last answer. So I need to, congratulate you all and WashU as a university for their commitment in this important endeavor. But I think the answer to the question is that the attacks kind of make the point. I mean, a lot of it is coming from the president, his attack on critical race theory, as well as use of implicit bias training and addressing federal employees. And we would be hard pressed to think of someone whose signature policy was a tax cut for those that are wealthy as someone that has the common man's interest at heart from my perspective. So I think to me, the attacks kind of make the point by which we need endeavors that study political economy and the role that race plays as a pillar in that relationship between economic and political consolidation. We talk about race to a large extent as if it's an issue, but the academic community can do a great deal of work in demonstrating its foundation in that relationship and how someone is able to use it as a divisive tactic for political gain when, what I tried to point out, the ultimate interest in the president, in my view, is not an egalitarian economic system.
Thank you. Steve.
Yeah, it's a tough question, but I would just remind us, that we've been in crisis for a whole long time, and that these efforts that we're engaged in now in 2020 are ones that have parallels to all the decades that I've been alive, I think. And certainly some of the big centers devoted to the study of race created in other decades prior to the 2020s felt that they were being created at moments of profound tension, stress, crisis, and emergency. That's not to say we're not in one now. It's just to say that in doing the work we're doing now, we're carrying forward efforts that, have been established by past founders and scholars and activists and others. One of the ways I think about the importance of our center is to keep in mind our acronym. So we're the Center for the Study of Race, Indigeneity, and Transnational Migration, so RITM. And so, I often remind myself that, this acronym, these letters, RITM, can be helpful in keeping my eye on what I think we should be doing. And so, in answering your question, I'll quickly, say a word about each of the letters of our name, going beyond race, indigeneity, and transnational migration. So I think about the R in our name also being about the center's important role in recruitment and retention of faculty and in rallying people together across the university. And this gets back to the comment about working against long established structures of knowledge in the universities that have been so departmentalized as to be quite conservative and to make impossible the work that many of us think we need to be doing. The I, can go in a lot of different directions, but for me, I think about that as the center playing an important role in inviting people in trying to kind of create a different culture of the university through its programs, through its structures that actually brings busy people together who are needed elsewhere in the university, but puts them together in the interest of advancing work collaboratively and together in ways that they might not otherwise do that work. The T I think of as a reminder about training, that I think, we're in this to a significant extent, to advance faculty development, to be involved in the work of postdoctoral mentoring, of graduate instruction, perhaps of undergraduate instruction. So this work of curricular development, of helping with tenure cases, of contributing to pipelines, these aspects of training, I think, are also a key role that centers like yours really can be, tremendously influential in, and do work that single departments can never do these days. And finally, the M in our name, I think of that as gesturing also to material or something like that. I mean, we need to bring the resources to people to do the work that they couldn't otherwise do, both inside the university. This means material to students, material to faculty members and others, but also outside the university. Sometimes that is actual financial resources that has to flow outside the university. Other times that's intellectual or cultural resources that the university can provide or engage with alongside alongside communities in struggle. And I think that these are all, aspects of what centers have long been doing. I didn't invent this, I think. Obviously, this is just a mnemonic device or whatever to kind of name some of these things. That certainly, it sounds to me like, is a commitment of what you're doing, Adrian and colleagues in St. Louis in the years to come.
Thank you, Steve. And Steve, also thank you. I want to thank you publicly for that very long and valuable conversation that you had with me. It feels like a long time ago now, really helping to walk through and understand a lot of the architecture. And I hope you see some of what we did.
I've learned a lot from you, so thank you.
Well, a lot of the bricks. Jennifer.
Sure, and I was remiss. I wanted to say that I'm speaking to you from the unceded homelands of the Muwekma Ohlone peoples here in Oakland, California, but it also goes all the way down to Stanford. So in terms of this question, I think that one of the key points, I want to sort of echo what Chandra said about power differentials, is that we need to be thinking not only about the emergency of the moment, which, as Steve said, is a perpetual emergency, but of for whom and to what end do we do this work? And a couple of years ago, in June of 2018, I actually brought together some of my colleagues. Steve was there, but I wish I had brought all of you here, and I hope maybe we can have a national network of race centers and people working on questions of inequity in public health, and all of our colleagues here and across the nation, just so that we don't get marginalized, so that we can share different structures. Our universities are different, but I think it's really important to have such centers, again, because and certainly it's true at Stanford, we have very few places of interdisciplinary scholarship of the kind that race and racism require. And one of the issues for us is we don't have a way of hiring our own faculty. So there is a tension with the question of what is a center versus ethnic studies departments. And again, this speaks directly to the historical structuring of the university around departments, and that question of who is our faculty, who are our constituents. Like you, Adrian, we have both an undergraduate program, we got a new PhD minor, we have graduate students who come to us via fellowships. But we are not a department. We have 150 affiliate faculty across the university who participate in various degrees. But we still struggle to teach our core courses, to think about how to go forward with our mission, which we know. I circulated the president's letter because my partner works in the government. So I saw that early version of that against critical race studies. And so we know about that, but I think there are larger issues of how can we do this work, again, for whom and to what end?
Thank you. Muted.
Sorry about that. So, Steve, you were really, I think, beginning to allude to this, the question of what support do race centers need to thrive? Historically, as we're saying, we collectively, all of us who are directors now, stand literally on the shoulders of giants, people who were not only experts in producing knowledge, but also many of them were also not only advocates, but activists, right? To really literally, in many cases, had to almost violently extract resources from universities, going back to the very early days, founding of Black Studies. And as you point out, Jennifer, it does feel like we're in a state of perpetual emergency. And yet also, as you point out, Steve, sometimes the crises sort of boil up to a point where institutions feel compelled to act. And it can make then race centers' relationship to resources very precarious, unstable, uneven, and we're brand new. So I want to pose the question, what kinds of supports do race centers need to thrive? And as you point out, Stephen, it may not only be, money, but it may be also other kinds of resources. And it may not only be resources from the university, it may also be resources from outside as well and from our communities. So what's the broad set of support and resources that we all need to survive and to thrive? And I'll start with you, Steve, because you kind of kicked us off in some ways.
Tough question. And I think the answers may in some ways be local answers that may differ from university to university and center to center. And I think as I talk, my colleagues here on the panel will probably have far better ideas than I have. But let me name a couple things off the top of my head. I mean, I think across campuses, across centers, I think, first, I think it's really important that a race studies center have strong support from the top leadership of a university. This has to be seen, and in what I've heard already on in this discussion today, as it seems certainly to be the case at WashU, this has to be seen as a central part of the university's mission. It has to be seen as core to the university priorities moving forward, and it has to be treated as such. That means in conversations, development-related conversations about university resources going forward. That means in conversations across the provostial ranks, the deans, other top leadership. The message, I think, needs to be consistent and clear that a center is not peripheral, it's not a sideshow, but it actually does course through the work of the university at its very heart. So that's one thing. A second thing is, I think, related, that a center needs to have leverage in the work that it's doing on campus. Jennifer mentioned that many of our centers struggle with this because we don't have as much say in faculty hiring, promotions, faculty time, because folks come in through departmental channels. And some of that may continue to happen everywhere. That's just the nature of universities, for better and for worse. But there have to be some mechanisms for leveraging the power of race centers in moving departmental cultures, divisional units, the interests of students, and all of that. So those would be two things that I would name off the top of my head. And then, the other ones may be more obvious. I think, healthy budgets, I think, are really important. Ones that, are comparable to the importance of a center in the university mission. Again, if it's not a sideshow, but it's core and key, that it needs to be treated as such in university budgeting. staff time and staff resources, really important. We're trying to bring people together and do key work. Folks need staff support, and that staff has to be able to do the work of the center. And then the final one would be space. I do think that space is important. Even as we live our lives these days on Zoom, we do remember the moment in which people do need to gather together, come together, see one another, both in formal settings and also informal settings. And I know that we've benefited from having lounge space, dedicated classroom space, and the like, as a mechanism for bringing people together and giving people a place to go. So those would be the things that come to mind right off the top, Adrienne.
Thank you. Chandra.
Steve's response really has me thinking about the way in which we're structured, which is a relatively small center, what's smaller than our productivity might suggest. I would say, of the many things I could say, two things I would really emphasize are external leverage, external to both the unit in which we're housed, which is the School of Public Health, and the institution itself has been really important, so that our center does not see as its primary stakeholder the institution, the faculty, administrators, but really the work in the community. But that obviously creates a tension in terms of resources and a number of other things. So that's one. And then the obvious of funding and material support, not just because it enables us to do the work, but because obviously it says something about how the institution sees and values the work that we do.
Thank you, Chandra. Jennifer.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on something Chandra just said, and I put in the chat that we're having our 25th anniversary this year, and we had a group of interracial comparative scholars who founded our center 25 years ago. But it was originally the work of Latina activists who went on a hunger strike to start our center. One of the last things Chandra just said was about community engaged learning or community activism and other partnerships and the ways in which such race centers can be extra university in terms of its public facing work and knowledge. And I think that's a really important part and unique to what we can do as opposed to a department. So I do think there's an important value to having this particular kind of a structure, even though I was saying before it has also, its downsides. What was I saying? Oh, I forgot the question. I'm sorry, Adrienne.
It's about the resources we need.
Oh, right. The resources. I just second everything that Steve said, both that it should be important. And, right now it looks like a lot of foundations are interested in social justice philanthropy. And I will just point out that I'm very grateful to Steve and our colleagues at the University of Chicago. Right now it's Riley Snorton who heads up their new center, or the center from Michael Dawson started years ago, and also at Brown, at Tricia Rose. We are in a collaboration funded by the Mellon Foundation. We've called ourselves the Centering Race Consortium and we've gotten a really substantial grant from the Mellon Foundation for work that we're doing along the lines of what you're doing, Adrienne, in terms of labs and atelier and, different kinds of programming around race, arts, and the humanities. So I think that now is also a time when there are some resources outside the university. But we certainly need the support from the central administrations. Sorry.
And I want to say that I think that it's interesting. So the current administration's sense that training in critical race theory and race studies could be threatening to racial supremacy is correct. because many of the leaders of the foundations that are now focused on this set of issues themselves are, of course, some of the pillars of I'm thinking here of Elizabeth Alexander and others, right, who themselves were trained in or were part of the progenitors of critical race theory or other cultural projects, as Laurent says. And Derek, I'll give Derek the last word, but so Laurent, what's your take about resources that are needed?
I think all these responses are great. I would emphasize space. I think it's very symbolic, where a place is on a campus and the ability to kind of convene. I've been thinking a lot as I was preparing about this of Catherine Dunham, who's somebody that I've been working on, who's from St. Louis and who for really the last 30, 40 years of her life was in between St. Louis and Haiti, trying in some ways to do, I think, exactly the thing that you're doing now with the Arts Lab, for instance, which was to kind of create a real sort of interface between culture and the arts and kind of activism in certain ways. And indeed, she went on a hunger strike in protest of immigration policy and spent the rest of her lives in a wheelchair because of that. But so she was so engaged. And so I was sort of thinking of her a little bit as an ancestor, a local ancestor of what you're trying to do. But I mentioned that in part because in addition to all these things that we're trying to say, I think in order for these types of initiatives to thrive within universities, things have to change more broadly at universities, right? For these kinds of work, this kind of work to be at home university, there's some really key things that have to change. And this is where the idea of a kind of national, coalition might be part of it. We really need to tackle the kind of questions of promotion, tenure, hiring. I know we've all been parts of processes where we've seen that people who are incredibly engaged scholars or public scholars or do kind of work that pushes at the boundaries of things, hit a kind of block, right? We know we can all think of many cases of this, I'm sure, that we've experienced or in the past. So I think that part of it is that if those structures don't change, right, and then the academy can't truly change to be open to these sorts of spaces if we don't really rethink some of those things, right? And it's not that, I think, so, and that's where the central support needs to happen, because that's the only things that can happen at the university level, at a higher level, and across universities, to think through those types of things, to really think through the types of experiences that faculty are going through, that graduate students go through, that, a lot of experiences of suffering and marginalization that people in these fields experience, and how to address those, I think, as a sort of internal structural question. And those, of course, reflect larger patterns in society that we're trying to address as well. But so I do think that's a place to really think through, because I think we all have, to some extent in private, to some extent we know this. And maybe it's time to make it into, the more we can make that into a larger conversation, to really address some of the barriers that have held back people, or at least, just kind of created, I guess, unneeded difficulties and suffering for people who are doing fantastic work and should be rewarded for it.
Thank you, Laurent. Derek, you have directed two centers now, right? The highly renowned and regarded Kirwan Institute at Ohio State. And just in September, I think, you started at the New School directing their center. So what's your sense of the kinds of resources that are needed?
I agree with most of my colleagues and would say that universities have a moral and ethical responsibility to center shared prosperity as their larger university mission, period, right? So that independent of any institute or center, this type of work should be promoted at the university level, I think, period. But beyond that, endowments are critical, and endowments where there's enough resources by which these institutes and centers are not reliant upon cycles of philanthropy and cycles of administrations for their livelihood. I think that's critical, because we've seen that race is in vogue today, but our importance isn't, in my view, any more important today than it was yesterday. There are a set of issues and events that have occurred and have been highlighted that have heightened our work. But if you ask me, the mission today was just as important as it was 2 years ago. And it's going to be just as important 5 years ago, even as we tackle these issues, because what we do is beyond the conventional wisdom of understanding bigotry, ignorance, and hate. What we do is we understand power. The craft that we engage in is largely about power And in my transcends the American context. It looks at, you've talked about this already, Adrian, understanding in an international perspective, the ways in which society is divided along identity, and identity is used in hierarchical, as a hierarchical mechanism by which some can have and others can have not. I know my colleagues and I can talk a lot more about this, but at the end of the day, we need resources that are endowed to protect us from the political economy at large, as well as the political economy within universities that are motivated by the various aspects that we study in order of hoarding resources away from some versus others.
Thank you all. And I want to just call out one of my colleagues, John Constantino, reminded us that one of the distinct advantages that we have here at CRE2 is that we are by campus. We include all 6 of our Danforth schools, and we include our extraordinary medical campus. And because of the way our medical campus is, our School of Medicine is organized, we're also very tightly tied to the health system of BJC, which is the largest employer, the largest healthcare system in the state. And I was actually having coffee the other day with the head of the system, who is himself very, very committed to tackling structural racism, and just appointed his first chief diversity officer, Stephen Player. So we look forward to collaborating deeply. And thank you, John, for reminding us again that resources are not only coming from the university, but they come from many different places. I want to combine 2 questions together that may take up the rest of our time. So how can race centers work together to build capacity, and how can race centers help shape knowledge production and policy? So kind of take up both of those questions together, and I will start with, Laurent. Laurent, are you muted?
Adrian, you might want to start with somebody else.
Okay, you might be having technical problems. Let me start with Jennifer.
Okay, well, I think I already said one thing I think we can do, which is to speak to one another to get to the second half of the question, which would be to say, what is it that we could do to shape either national curriculum in terms, it would be different at every school, but, what can we have some conversations about pedagogy, about, having a sense of the field, because I think we don't really have that. We don't have a national meeting currently, whether it's international or within the states, to study really questions of race, racism, and ethnicity in the ways I think that this particular collaboration of folks do. And I know we were trying to get a K through 12 ethnic studies curriculum passed in the state of California with our founding director, Al Camarillo, and it just got voted down. But I think the sense to which we might be able to leverage some of our power collectively to make inroads in policy, broader questions of exactly bringing in communities, community education, community health issues. I think that it would be really great to have a sense of making ourselves into, if you can do that organically, a kind of space where or a union, a collaboration, we could advocate for really impactful ideas that, again, wouldn't be the sort of status quo of inclusion, right, without shifting the power structures, and who actually has a voice to make a difference in being able to promote our community. And one quick way we are doing that at Stanford is through our Race and Tech Practitioner Fellows. Obviously, I'm speaking to you from Silicon Valley, and Steve's written beautifully about this work and the transformation of how we became that. But it's a place that generates great inequity and new technologies around facial recognition and policing. There is much, much work to be done in thinking through better uses, not just for capital profits, but also of that technology for the good of a social good of a larger community. So again, I think in every realm, it would be wonderful to be able to put researchers together from our different spaces and places globally and locally to intervene in some of the pressing social problems that are negatively affecting our communities.
Thank you, Jennifer. Laurent?
I think you have a great setup, a way to do this. I love this idea of the black papers and of different ways of, I think part of what has to happen is both responding to questions as they're posed, and also some of what we always do, right, is asking different questions or reframing the questions that people are posing and sort of asking people to reorient and think differently about things. So I think it's that combination of both responding to the urgent and the pressing things, but also insisting that some of the ways that things are being apprehended might be missing the point, right? And I think that kind of double work is always a challenge. So again, centering the importance of arts or culture or other realms that sometimes don't quite seem maybe perhaps urgent in the same way, but are crucial in kind of informing the cultural shifts that will ultimately shape other kinds of shifts. So I think the other thing is just that the more, in the work we've done here, relationship, the kind of work in a community or with a city or those sorts of things are just long-term relationship building projects, right? And so to really think kind of very carefully and deliberately about how those relationships are built and sustained over a long time kind of makes it, I think, possible to intervene and to rethink the way that universities and the cities or communities in which they are located really work together, which is, there's still a long way to go in those areas too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Chandra.
I really like what everyone is saying here, and I think this is a very difficult question to answer. What I would add is that I think on top of what's already been said is, for me, I try to think about the difference between doing research on racism versus anti-racism research. And I think it's important to have these networks of other centers who have a similar ethic about the role of the work, so that, we can hold one another accountable, we can support one another, and so forth. So I believe that's a critical piece that has to be out there. And in particular, in this moment where it's easy to put a face of color, an indigenous face forward as if it represents the very work it tokenizes the work and the community. So that's one thing I would add to it, that I think it would be really useful. Actually, I'll add one other additional point that's tied to that, but thinking about what that means at the institution level is to think about how the importance, to clarify the extent to which the centers are only a place of scholarship and research, and even of community engagement, versus the extent to which they also serve as a refuge for members of our community. And if they are, partially at least, a refuge for members of our community, how do we ensure that those spaces are safe spaces? Because the appeal to people who are not aware of their racial behaviors or attitudes and so forth, there's a way in which these spaces can become spaces where harm can be done, if we're not attentive to the ways in which individuals, for instance, might be drawn to them as a way to prove that they're not racist, and so forth. So,
Derek?
I guess I would start with, what is our purpose? Why do we exist in the first place? And that would lead us to want to, I think, work together. I think each of us has larger missions than ourselves and our particular institute, but to affect change in society. So that in my view should lead us to think about working together. And, I'd suggest an approach by which we can work together. And that is three themes. One, we try to look where there's common narratives, common purpose, and we highlight those. We work to be cooperative rather than competitive. We know in our tight scarcity of funding and notoriety that the world pits us against one another, but that we're active in trying to be cooperative rather than competitive. And third, that we fellowship, that we are intentional in trying to get together and like each other. The work becomes better and more enjoyable when we spend time with one another and learn about each other as human beings. So I think that's an approach. I'd say our impact. What better endeavor for the academy and for us than to understand the power of race and stratification as it relates to economic inclusion, civic engagement, social equity, access to culture, et cetera. I think what we do, we promote race beyond just an issue, but as a power pillar in those endeavors that I just described. And it fits well when we talk about humanist endeavors. Narratives influence the ways in which our political economy works. We see it all the time in the media. A lot of it is not about policy, it's about narrative. Social sciences become another link by which we engage. Understanding politics, economics, et cetera, sociology. And then we'd be naive to think that the scientific endeavor is devoid of social impacts, that what happens from a social standpoint impacts the scientific endeavor. And the questions we ask are influenced by our backgrounds, our identity, and then the professional school's action. I think this is a model. I'll end with the point that you raised in the beginning, Adrian, when you were talking about the modus operandi of what I got to make sure I get it right, CRE2, I think I got it wrong already, but what the new center at WashU will do, research as a grounding. You're going to be truth-seeking. You're going to be understanding phenomena and relationships, learning from that research. And then finally, community, because you're interested in action and affecting change. I think that's a great model and a great approach, and I congratulate you on this endeavor.
Thank you, Derek. Steve, I think you're the last one, right?
Not sure. I don't have a lot to say, but maybe this is just a rephrasing of some things that were already said. I think all of us are, very committed to assuring very high quality research and teaching in these fields in the years to come. Our students, our communities, our nation, the world, needs the best research and teaching on these topics that we can offer. I think we're also committed to the advancement of leaders on our campuses who are faculty and staff of color, and who can represent these issues with force and with intelligence, both in our academic fields, in our departments, on our centers, but also well beyond. So in the spirit of something Derek said, I think to think of our work as cooperative and collaborative across universities, and not as in competition with one another, but to see ourselves engaged and committed to a mutual project of bringing this work to the central attention of the world with the best teaching and scholarship we can provide, and to seeing these centers as incubators of talent, of voice, of leadership on these questions, by people like you, Adrian, who can really move these discussions forward to everybody's benefit. I think of, a couple generations ago, the rise of humanities centers on campuses around the country as one example. These were founded in large numbers in many places, and they really shifted the dialogue, the discussion of what education looked like around the country, in many ways to great benefit of everybody. And I think that, individually on our campuses with the different efforts that we're engaged in, but also collectively, we have the opportunity, and I think WashU can take a real leadership role in this, in assuring that these questions around race and equity ethnicity, indigeneity, and so much more can be the focus of university efforts, can guide researchers, and those researchers and others who are leading the universities can play more prominent, more important roles on their campuses and elsewhere in the coming years.
Well, I want to thank all of you. The five of you have inspired my academic work personally, even for those of you who came up behind me, like Dr. Ford. I still remember some wonderful conversations that we engaged in at UNC. And you have more recently, your leadership of your centers has really inspired our collective effort to create something that we hope will shine as brightly as all of yours do. And I also want to thank the university's leadership. I want to thank the generations of scholars, advocates, and activists who came before us, who's laid the groundwork for doing this work. I want to thank my colleagues for being the amazing, brilliant scholars who they are, who inspire the Chancellor's confidence to fund this. And I want to thank the architects of the center, first the committee that co-created it, and over the last year and a half, the amazing associate directors, Billy Acree, Hetty Lee, Otis Johnson, Cynthia Rogers, and most recently, Jeff Ward. I want to end by quoting something from my former colleague, Molly Tovar, and colleague, Chris Leiker. Molly, for many years, was the director of the Catherine N. Booter Center for American Indian Studies and professor of practice at our Brown School. And Chris Leiker was lead publications editor at the School Center for Social Development. So I'm quoting from them. Today, we honor our Indigenous ancestors, family, friends, neighbors, and roots. Today and every day, we give thanks for the leadership, stewardship, beauty, courage, wisdom, resistance, and resilience of the Indigenous peoples of this land. On an autumn day in 1808, the elders of the Osage Nation gathered at Fort Clark, a new outpost overlooking the Missouri River near what is now Sibley, Missouri. The council assembled to consider a treaty with the young American Republic, a treaty requiring them to give up over 52 million acres of Osage land east of the fort. The treaty was proffered with a threat: sign or become enemies of the United States. Close quote. So begins the article acknowledging Native history in Missouri, which was published by Molly and Chris in the 2019 issue of the Missouri Humanities magazine. More than 100 elders signed the treaty, giving up most of what is now Missouri and half of what would become Arkansas. And in exchange, the Osage received the promise of the public's protection, $1,200 in cash, and merchandise of similar values. They evaded annihilation by accepting those terms. Our university, our campus, sits on land stewarded by people for millennia that was ceded in the treaty. And hence, Washington University and CRE2 acknowledges that we are located on the ancestral lands of Native peoples who were removed unjustly, and that our community is the beneficiary. We honor our heritage of Native peoples and what they teach us about stewardship of the earth. Thank you all so much for joining us, and we hope to see you all soon.